with this last part, which is the launch of an IMD new ranking, the Smart City Index. Arturo Bris will present it to you in a couple of seconds. Just let me introduce to you our speakers for the next panel. With us, Professor Heng Chee, chairwoman of the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. With us also this evening, can I say at past 5, is Chee Khern, Permanent Secretary under Prime Minister's Office, Chairman of GovTech in Singapore also, and also Bruno Lanvin, President of the IMD Smart City Observatory. Arturo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, evening again. So, before I start, we had planned to have one woman in every single panel, you know, and you know that cancellations happen. Unfortunately, we had 2 cancellations today, and the 2 of them are women, okay? But it was in the original objective of this conference to have at least one woman in every panel, which is something that you will see from now on, okay? But so I apologize on behalf of those who have cancelled, okay? Now I can start, okay? So there are 19 cities in the world today, 19, that have more than 10 million people, okay? Of course, some of them are in China, but not all of them, okay? Many of the world's largest capitals have large populations. And it basically means that if you think about that, Switzerland, on that count, would be one of the smallest cities in the world, if you consider Switzerland to be a city, okay? We realized already a few years ago that our focus on countries to study competitiveness, be it digital competitiveness or talent, attraction, is kind of flawed because it doesn't work. Today, the United States cannot be considered as a single economy, you know, because there are many different economies in East and West. China is certainly not one single economy, okay? And because of that issue, I think we have been reflecting a lot over the last years, and then we came to the conclusion that we need to move much more into regions and into cities. So I'm very proud to be able to present to you the result of our efforts. Today at 10 a.m., we launched publicly our Smart City Index that tries to assess the extent to which cities build prosperity by using technology. In essence, is to what extent cities are competitive, but focused primarily on technology. We have partnered with an amazing organization from Singapore, Singapore University of Technology and Design, and Professor Chen is here with us. So thank you very much for being with us, and also for this partnership that we have had together in order to come up with this index. Professor Chen will be responsible for discussing later a little bit more about some of the cities. Okay? On that effort as well, we decided to create a new center called the Smart City Observatory, and we found the best person on earth, if I may say, Bruno, to run this center. Bruno is the president of the Smart City Observatory based at the IMD World Competitiveness Center, and Bruno has a lot of experience in international organizations, especially the World Bank, and also in academic institutions assessing competitiveness from many different fronts. He's particularly interested in the role of cities. And he's running our center, and he has also pioneered the effort from the IMD side. And Bruno is also going to speak about that later. Okay. And finally, you are going to hear Chee Khern. Chee Khern is a very loyal friend of IMD, actually one of our alum, but also a very prominent government official from Singapore, who, as you will see, has something to say about smart cities because, well, for one particular reason that I will mention in a second. Okay? Just let me describe to you the results, because if you are interested in having a detailed look at the results, the center has stopped printing paper and everything is digitally, so you can actually scan a QR code that we will show later, and now you have access to our website where you can download all the details in this ranking, okay, and in this index, as we call it. But let me first give you a very brief overview to what we are trying to do. When you approach smart cities, the danger is that you only look at it from the technological perspective. And in the last years, in order to learn, I have attended many events based on smart cities, which are typically dominated by companies very much focused on the technology. And you think that a smart city is about having smart traffic cameras and Wi-Fi in the whole city, and amazing digital parking spaces and e-mobility and so on. But very often, technology doesn't result in people's quality of life. So one of our first steps in this effort was to understand to what extent technology drives prosperity. And we found very interesting things, and in fact, our first output was this book that you can see here that we published already in May, is the 16 Shades of Smart, which is a very funky title, where what we did was to prepare 16 cases of different cities and how they approach smartness. And we found, for example, when you look at Medellin, that was mentioned earlier, which was one of our case studies, that in fact Medellin is smart because the way they approach technology is as a way to improve safety. As you heard earlier from Diego, of course, safety is a big deal in Medellin. So if you implement technology to reduce traffic congestion in Medellin, probably this doesn't improve people's quality of life because what people want is safety. We also found that, for example, in Ramallah, in Palestine, they have a free Wi-Fi, which by itself is an extremely powerful technology because it empowers people a lot. So with a very small effort to have free Wi-Fi in the city, they actually allow people to enjoy a massive leap in their quality of life. Okay? So that's what we try to do in this index. And again, I will not bore you with methodology, but essentially what we did was just to go to cities and then ask people how they think technology improves their quality of life. And in that sense, our effort is pioneer. All of the other rankings, they try to assess the quality of the technology. We try to assess the quality of life of people and to what extent this is linked to technology. So instead of asking whether you have smart traffic cameras, we ask people, do you suffer from traffic congestions? Okay? And to what extent technology has helped you avoiding traffic congestion. And that's why our ranking is very much based on perceptions. Very often, doesn't match with our first impression when we visit a city, because what happens then is that even though there is a massive technology, in fact, it's not used in the right way. Okay? So I will not give you details. I will just give you a very brief, a big overview of our ranking. What I want you to see in this map is a very reduced view to the geography of our index. We are going to analyze, and we're analyzing 102 cities. Not all of them are shown here. And what we do for those cities is two things. First of all, we have a ranking, because that's what we live for, to publish rankings. But besides the ranking, we're trying to provide what we call a country rating. It's kind of an IMD/SUTD certification of the smartness of a city. And here we copy the rating agency's scale of having AAA, AA, single A, and so on cities. Okay? We don't have these cities because we want to be nice. Okay? So no city fails in that sense. But the ranking goes from A to C. Our rating goes from A to C, if you want. And here you have a rough overview of some cities like, San Francisco being number 12 and rated A, but, Oakland being number 6. And you can see also from this map, the number 1 city in our ranking is Singapore. And that's why Chee Khern, obviously, is here today to explain to us what they do well. Okay? We don't have space to show all of the cities, so let me just show you here the top 10. And you can see both the ranking and the rating. We're assessing two different factors, as we like to call them. The structures will involve the processes and the governance organization of the city to promote quality of life. And second, we assess the technology itself, again, from the standpoint of citizens. This is a perception index. It's not a tangible, it's an index of tangible technology. Look at the top 10 cities in our ranking: Singapore, Zurich, Oslo, Geneva, so we have two cities on the top, two Swiss cities on the top 5, Copenhagen, Auckland, Taipei, Helsinki, Bilbao, and Düsseldorf. Geographically, they span the whole world, but I will actually highlight here two characteristics of smart cities in our ranking. First of all, smart cities tend to be mid-size. Okay? I think that it is very difficult for a city with 10 million people to provide prosperity for all. That explains why, for instance, you will not find a Chinese city in this index. Actually, Chinese cities tend to rank much lower, primarily because the finding is mid-sized cities. Geneva is probably a good example, but Singapore as well. They tend to make it easy for politicians to create the right environment. The second ingredient in the top 10, or the second characteristic of the top 10 cities, is that they generally come from highly developed countries. And that's also because intentionally we have generated our ranking by classifying countries into different groups. Our premise is that unless your country is well developed, then you cannot have a fully smart city, because economic development is a necessary condition for smartness. Okay? And the first step to be smart is to be competitive, or at least to have a high index of human development, which is the way how we are going to measure this factor. Okay? So you can see then, as a result, it is very natural that the city like Zurich or a city like Copenhagen are actually in the top of our ranking. Okay? You can also see how we follow this scale of AAA versus CCC, and we only qualify Singapore and Zurich as AAA cities. Okay? And the rating goes down fast to Düsseldorf becoming number A. With a rating A. Here you have the entire ranking, which is somehow difficult to read because of the 102 cities. But as I say, if you are interested into details, you can find around all this QR code that you can scan to access for every city an individual report. If you have been outside, you have seen that we have some kiosks with computers that you can use to actually check any city that you are interested in. Okay? And because addressing any particular issue of a city, it is going to be quite complicated, I just leave the ranking there, but I'm not going to allow you to ask questions. Okay? Because you have a complaint about Stockholm or a complaint about Moscow. So instead of that, we are going to just have a discussion with our colleagues here, starting with Bruno, that I will ask here Bruno to talk a little bit about the perspective from the Smart City Observatory, especially about the cities that we have been closer to. Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you, Arturo. So let me first thank both Arturo and Jean-François Manzoni for accepting the challenge of hosting a new center, the Smart City Observatory, and supporting the creation of this new index. We live in a world where we tend to overmeasure everything. We have too many indices, we have too many KPIs, we have too many quantification of about everything, and we tend very often to forget the human factor, the human dimension behind the things we try to measure. Yet, we know that it's very difficult to improve something you cannot measure. So when we started discussing about whether we should engage in that, and that was even before we started having the support of SUTD and engage in that discussion on both sides of the world, we said, should we really create a new index? Okay? And the answer was very clear from all the parties involved. We should create a new index only if it is useful. So what is a useful index? A useful index is an index that is being used for anything except publicity. It is very tempting to issue an index, and Arturo mentioned that many of the indices about smart cities are focused on technology. They are very often sponsored by one company who has one smart solution, whether it is in parking, in energy, in lighting, in everything. And that's not what we want. What we want is something that decision makers, be they mayors, but also investors, citizens, activists, can use to improve their lives and the lives of other citizens. That's, in 2 words, the short mandate we gave ourselves when we started this effort. Just a word about what Arturo said about in introducing this panel, saying from now on we have at least one woman on every single panel until the end of the day, at least. And it refers to some of the discussions that happened earlier today. I want to insist, being a French citizen, that French is probably the best language we have to address gender issues. Because first it has genders, and not all languages have genders, but because it is a language in which the problem is masculine and the solution is feminine. So let's keep that in mind for the future. Back to cities. So I'm going to let Professor Chan cover the Asia-Pacific cities, and then Chee Khern will tell us about Singapore, and I will actually say a few words about the rest of the world. So let's focus on the Americas. Okay, we've already heard, especially from Diego Molano earlier today, of the case of Medellin. So I will try to highlight a few examples to give you an idea of how we think such an index can be useful on the ground. Medellin is a very fascinating example for all the reasons that Diego mentioned already. It had to do with rebranding. Medellin was known from the rest of the world. Many cities fight to be known. Medellin didn't have that problem. They were very well known, but for the wrong reasons. So in that situation, the work is even harder. And one of the avenues they pursued was to become a smart city. But smart city was not an end in itself. It was, how can we resurrect the image of the city, make the lives of citizens better, away from corruption, away from the drug cartels, and into something that would make Medellin an appealing city, as opposed to being an appalling city. That is, to attract talent, to attract investment, to attract activity. And what we see in the responses we got to the survey and the different categories in that index is that the notion of smart city in a place like Medellin was immediately linked to a number of very practical objectives. Safety was one of them. Another one was waste management. So there are critically important, very concrete things that citizens could see by themselves. When you ask them, is this working? They don't care about saying, they have more bandwidth available through their local Wi-Fi. They say, yes, it has changed my life because I can now walk at night on the streets. I know that the garbage is going to be collected on a regular basis. These are the kind of objectives we see in a place like Medellin and in many other Latin American countries. North America is another story because we have, at the same time, a number of new cities, typically created from scratch. They had all the ways to become smart city because they were building from the desert or expanding very, very quickly. And we have rather old cities, especially around the Rust Belt. And what we see is quite interesting. You've seen that in the top 10 that Arturo presented before, there's no US cities. And you might say, why? US is the country of technology, it's the country of innovation. How come we don't see any US cities there? There are a number of reasons for that. One of them is that, remember that this is based on perception. Okay? Even if we mixed it with hard data, the core of the exercise is about perception. And people have been living in these cities for a long time. have mixed feelings about technology, even in places like Boston or Silicon Valley, where they live very close to what's happening at the forefront of innovation. They tend to say, video surveillance we don't like. Privacy, confidentiality. Again, going back to what Diego was mentioning, should we trust Facebook? Should we trust Google? Should we trust others? There's some kind of maturity that is translating into the way in which progress is being welcome or unwelcome regarding smart city. So we have a number of mixed feelings in these older cities, and that's just one dimension of what we see in North America. Places like Montreal, for instance, are probably more akin to look at it positively, because Montreal has a strategy to become an AI hub. So it starts to pervade local culture. If we look at other parts of the world, let's look at Europe. There's a majority of European cities in the top 10, but also in the index. We expect that this will be rebalanced in the future, and we'll work for it. In Europe, you see a group that is doing very well, which is what I call the Nordic cities in a broad sense. And to see how broad Nordic city is in the way I mean it, I gladly include Benelux cities, and I gladly include Swiss cities. So that's my definition of Nordic. Basically, this Nordic approach to being a smart city is citizen-centric. It is about quality of life. This is a common thread we see. So this is what has guided from the start the strategies to become smart city. It's about environment, it's about mobility, it's about smart grids, it's about a number of elements which are shared. There's this common approach with a strong involvement of citizens from the start. And then in Europe, you have another category, which is that of the older metropolises. If you look at the rankings, you will see that among these 102 cities, big places, some of the oldest cities in Europe, and that includes places like Paris, Rome, London to some extent, Athens, are ranking fairly low. And we know that in all these places, things are happening at the level of technology. You have a number of startups, you have a number of entities that produce remarkable solutions. But there's clearly something missing in terms of what the first roundtable called building consensus. Not just national consensus, but getting people to understand and to support the idea that building a smart city is something which is done for them. Very often in these older places, the feeling is, yes, another fad, another publicity of somebody who wants to get reelected and say we have the latest gimmick available to our citizens. So there's generally a less positive attitude in the older cities than in what I call the Nordic group. And then we have places like Bilbao, ninth, which are smaller places, typically less than 500,000 inhabitants. Geneva would fall in that category as well, which have been doing everything together. They have been rebuilding, rebranding, establishing strategies, innovating, etc. Bilbao is a remarkable example because I don't know how many people have been to Bilbao in this room. So quite a large number. How many people have been going to Bilbao more than 20 years ago? Smaller number. And I'm sure, please raise 2 hands if you disagree with what I'm saying. 20 years ago, Bilbao was a horrible place. Okay? It was smokestack industry. The river had been buried. You didn't know there was a river in Bilbao. So it was a place for paper mills, for steel mills. It was really a place you didn't want to go to. And yet, today, it has green spaces, it's dynamic, you see the river. It's a place that is one of the most attractive cities in Europe about foreign talent. The Basque community has spread the world in Silicon Valley and other places, and everybody is not only coming back, but new talents is going to the city. So these are examples of diversity of Europe. And then We want to focus very much on other areas where there's a smaller number of smart cities, like the Middle East and Africa. In the Middle East, you have places which are very advanced. Dubai is one of the best examples we have. It was part of our case studies, where clearly the notion of smart cities goes hand in hand with having a policy on AI. There is a minister of AI. There is also a minister for happiness. All that is combined into a vision that we need a new approach. And not just for the country of the United Arab Emirates, but also for Dubai. And Abu Dhabi, the capital of the Emirates, also follows the same path. There you have typically the most advanced solution. There's also an incredible creativity about design, about architecture, about urban structures for two main reasons. First, there is money to do it. And second, there is a possibility to grow. It's less expensive in Dubai to redeem land over sea than to build in the desert. It's also more sustainable. So this is what is happening with solutions that have not been invented elsewhere because they did not need to be invented elsewhere. So this will be a source of further recipes for the future. And then you have typically areas in Africa. We looked at the megapolises like Lagos, Cairo, Nairobi, but also smaller cities where things are not going so well. But there are signs that innovative solutions are on the way. There are signs that citizens are getting engaged. So we also want now and in the future to get more and more involved in doing work on the ground with the places where smart cities are not yet a reality, but a hope, and a hope that guides action and a desire and an appetite for change. So I've gone a little farther than I intended to go by covering these areas of the world, but also to give you a feeling of our ambition. We are fairly ambitious with this new index, and how important two elements are in the future success of that index. The first one is feedback from the ground. We want to hear from citizens. We want to hear from decision makers of how useful that is, how we could improve it in the future. And second one is that we want to ensure that it supports further citizens' engagement. One of the lessons we get from that ranking, and Arturo already mentioned, that smaller cities are places where you can have more flexibility, more agility in implementing your policies. You don't have the same constraints as in a national state, especially if it's a bigger country. It's also places where there's more proximity between the citizens and the decision makers. Basically, City Hall is a few blocks away. So you meet your mayors, you meet the decision makers physically on practically a daily basis. And this is, for me, one of the key messages we got from that first edition of the index. Those who have succeeded in being close to the top are those where citizens' engagement was there from the start.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Arturo, thank you very much for having me on the panel. As Alex said, it's too bad you had to wait till this panel to have a woman. But let me put it this way. Whenever I speak in Singapore, I often make the remark that, how come I'm the only woman in today's proceedings? That happens a lot. I come from the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities in the Singapore University of Technology and Design, which was set up by Singapore and MIT when it started. After 8 years, MIT and us parted ways very friendly. We still do research together, but we now feel we can run on our own. It's a boutique university, engineering focus. I'm the social scientist in this university. I like the idea of working on the project with Bruno and Arturo because I thought this is something which would be a good learning exercise for me, for our center. And Singapore is always ready to learn, and we go outside to learn. We are not proud. So this is a learning exercise for me, how to create an index. And I liked in particular the idea that this index is not solely based on technology, as was mentioned. I remember attending a conference in China a couple of years back, and there were mayors. They were all trying to figure out how to be a smart city. And one mayor stood up and asked, well, how do you define smart? Is the more technology to better? That means you've got to be a rich city before you can be a smart city. What if I use whatever resources I have well? Doesn't that make me smart? And of course, we've been thinking in different ways about smart, more broadly, and taking into consideration other factors. And this index that is constructed looks at technology, but more importantly, looks at how citizens react to the technology, use the technology, and do they feel their lives have been made better? Is it better in the management of the city? And that's where the ranking stacks. And indeed, the medium and small size cities seem to have done better. When I looked at the whole ranking, I said, oops, some of these cities that are very smart, considered very smart, did not rank as high. And I will explain, for instance, later. Seoul is one of them, came out 47. And I said, oh my goodness, what happened? And I'll explain this later. When you look at size of cities and how you can reach people, that explains. And I have a comment to make about that too. So let me talk about the Asian cities and tell you the patterns as we see. We covered and I think I'm in this project because of the Asian cities, that we could bring some knowledge, some texturization, granular understanding to Asian cities. And there were 32 Asian cities that were studied in the whole list of 103. And when I say Asia, it's not the UN idea of Asia. It's Asia from Japan to India, including Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. And that's the Asia we covered. And we picked out 32 cities there. And in the book, 16 Shades of Grey, which was our attempt at looking at case studies, and we went into detail so that we have a granular understanding of how smart cities are built, what they did, and why they did what they did. And one thing that will come up in the other areas too is this very fact. There are cities that are considered to be right up there with IT industries. Bangalore, Shenzhen. They may not rank as well because you have all these innovative companies, but the city management doesn't use some of the technology, so there's a discrepancy. But in the 32 cities that are studied, let me say that in Asia, city leaders and national leaders are getting it. They understand they have to be smart, they want to be smart. You get this feeling when you travel through Asia. They want to be smart because they feel that is the way that they have to be smart to deal with the problems of rapid urbanization, which is happening in Asia. Megacities are growing. So, to be smart, but also to be competitive. You have to improve public services, you have to improve the lives of your people, but you can also remain competitive with smartness. So there's a great emphasis to be smart, and we are learning from each other. And also, I would say, citizens today demand that their governments have to produce well-managed cities. And because of that, they are also pressing for smart solutions. Now, the one thing that we learned from looking at all the Asian cities is that when you look at the cities, what you find in the smart cities, and they rank, some are smarter than others, the first thing that all these cities did was to lay the infrastructure, broadband infrastructure. That's the first thing they did. One of my colleagues said to me, do you know, when they make $10,000 per capita in the city, that's when they start being smart. And they can buy the technology. But you lay the broadband first. And the cities we studied, especially in the 6 cities in 16 shades of smart, where we went into detail, and they would be Bangalore, Singapore, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Chongqing, Seoul. They do broadband first and lay the infrastructure. And in China, in that they lay the broadband infrastructure not just in the top cities, second-tier cities, third-tier cities, just to get it across. Now, broadband infrastructure does help you become smart, but now, that's the first generation. Now we know that the wireless network, mobile networks help you, and you can leapfrog. And this is what happened in Jakarta. That in Jakarta, and now you find in many African cities, is a mobile network. You don't just rely on the broadband infrastructure, but you've got to get the infrastructure right. The second factor about smart cities in Asia that make them smart is governance. The emphasis on governance, and you find when there is a strong administrative culture, good bureaucracy, strong culture, and ability to think through plans, you have far more integrated ideas about how to bring about the smart city. And then they do implement that as well. So that is important. You find this in Seoul, in Chongqing, in Singapore. But I would say there's a strange paradox, because whilst you have strong administrative cultures in some cities like Singapore, Chongqing, Seoul, the paradox is that the citizens are a little less inclined to take up the technology. Things are done. The city is well run. Why do I have to take on more of the technology? Whereas, again, and this is a paradox, cities that don't have, where power is diffuse, there's no strong administrative culture, less delivery of the services, citizens invent their technologies. They come up with ideas, they become innovative there, because they use the technologies, create their apps to force their governments, the city governments, to be transparent and to deliver the city services that they want. So you have administrative cultures, strong bureaucracies that roll out the technologies and the programs. Citizens are happy, so they're quite complacent about it, and they like it. They respond, they say, yeah, we like this, we like the e-government, we like the filing tax in Singapore. It's so easy. It's almost a pleasure to pay tax. No, I'm kidding. But that happens, But once you have but in, say, Jakarta, where services are lacking in very many ways, citizens create their own apps to pressurize governments to be more smart. So that's the second observation I would make. One is infrastructure, then it is the governance. The third point I would like to make is that a lot of these cities now in Asia are using public-private partnership, and they're going through the PPP, they're going for the PPP solution, because they lack resources. They don't have the money. They bring in the companies, and companies help them to do so. In China, in Chongqing, the authorities of Chongqing city authorities invite Chinese companies to come in and set up in the city and ask the companies for ideas and also the investment, the resources. So that makes up for lack of city resources. In Jakarta, you will find that the companies there, Indonesian companies are very nationalistic and very patriotic, and they want to help the government. And in fact, we found that many of them collect data and gave it to the city government. So the companies come in public-private partnership, Bangalore too, Bangalore, you find the same thing. So these are just some of the patterns. Now let me talk about the outlier Seoul. I was quite shocked when I saw Seoul after the modeling came out 47, because they're smart on a lot of things and they do quite well on smart city indexes. So how do we explain this outlier? And I would say it's because Seoul is 11 million, metropolitan Seoul is bigger, 25. So I think it's a question of trying to reach out to the citizens. So for bigger cities, it's not that you can't be smart. Bigger cities just have to put more effort to sending it out to the citizens, and maybe some cities are just too big. If a mega city is 30 million, how on earth do you manage 30 million people? Do you cut it into quadrants and run each as a 10 million or less than 10 million city? So to me, that's just one of the ideas of city management. But it's how do you can roll out the technology, but do people know you have rolled out the technology? And how do they use it? A small group might be able to get it. So that, I think, covers the remarks I want to make. But I want to add just the last point. In ASEAN, since 2018, we have formed an ASEAN Smart Cities Network. There are 26 cities in ASEAN that have joined this network. When Singapore was the chair of ASEAN, we rolled out this because we realized that you need IT technology for the new economy, for economic growth. And we can't grow alone. Nobody can grow alone. So we are trying, and I think the region is with us on this. They all want to come into the Smart City Network. We help each other. It's contagious. And we also invite outsiders, our dialogue partners, Europe, America, Canada, to invest with us. So we need smart city solutions, and we have invited Europe to bring their companies to do business in ASEAN to help us create smart cities. In fact, we hope from this audience, there will be people who would be interested in that. And the smart city programs, 26 cities have signed on to the Smart Cities Network. They come up with their own blueprint, what they want done for smart cities. Some of it is just better urban planning, very basic urban planning. But some are looking at big data, data analytics, and so on. So I hope you will come to Asia, to Southeast Asia, and participate in our building of smart cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
I've spoken.
Thank you. Chee Khern, I guess that as chairman of GovTech, you are partly responsible for Singapore topping our ranking. So how did you do it?
I have 4 main points to make. Whatever other smaller stories I tell, let's hope I come back to 4 main points. The first point I want to make, let me start with a story. Most countries, most organizations have some founding myth. And in my case, I'm the permanent secretary of the Smart Nation Digital Government Group, which was formed in May 2017. But the genesis for why the group was formed was a few years earlier, when our Prime Minister told the country this story of how if a citizen sees a snake on the road, who does he call? He calls the Land Transport Authority. When a snake runs off the road, jumps into the drain, who do you call? You have to call the Public Utilities Board. But when the snake runs out from the drain and goes into the grass, who you have to call? You have to call the national parks. And when he runs off the the grass and goes into the public housing estate, you have to call the Housing Development Board. So this story has 2 important lessons. The first is that actually the citizen doesn't care who he calls. He just wants to call the bloody government. So we have to organize ourselves in a way whereby the government is a united front, an integrated front, and the citizen doesn't have to figure out who he has to call in the government. The second point about this is that so it's very user-centric, it's very citizen-centric, how the origin of how we were formed came about. The second moral of the story is that actually the Prime Minister is not interested in output indicators, he's only interested in outcome indicators. There's no excuse, you just get the job done, just get the snake. It doesn't matter where it is, with which agency, just get the snake. So from that origin, when we started to deal with the agenda of how to build Singapore into a smart nation and digital government, obviously there were lots of debate about what are the KPIs and so on and so forth. And there's a mixture of output KPIs and outcome KPIs. But the two topmost KPIs that is publicly published, that we have to report every year and how close we are to that KPI, under our 5-year digital government blueprint, is the government to citizen services, satisfaction in the government G2C services, and satisfaction with G2B services. So we're supposed to hit 80% high satisfaction on a scale of 1:5 to score 80% 4 and 5s. And we are now at G2C, we are at 68 as of last year, and G2C we are at 78, and G2B we are at 68. There's been significant improvements. The next survey is going to be done in the next few months, and it will be published first quarter of the next fiscal year. So we have to see how it goes. I mean, from within Smart Nation Digital Government Group, we look at it almost like an election. The figure will matter a lot, and it's an outcome indicator. It's a big subjective indicator. There's no excuse. You can't tell people all the problems or why you cannot achieve it. It's just the citizens and the business sector's satisfaction with you. So that's how it is. So the first point is that it is very citizen-focused, it's very outcome-focused. The second point is that while we build the services to try to achieve those outcomes, fundamentally, that is not the only thing that we are really focused on. So the second point that, as the permanent secretary of this particular organization, I'm very focused on is to build long-term capabilities. Because, one particular election or one particular survey, you can hit it, you can come down, you can go up, you can go down. But the only way to actually be really good is to pay attention to the long-term capabilities, the foundation of what it takes to be a smart city, what it takes to build yourself into a digital government. And in this area, I can go into lots of side stories because there's so many things to do to build long-term capabilities. One of the first things is that we do have, while we are not directly responsible for it, we have to work with many other ministries to inculcate in the public a certain receptiveness to technology, certain receptiveness to using technology, and for students to be interested in doing STEM subjects. As with many other countries in the world, interests of younger people to do STEM subjects have fallen, possibly because it's so difficult. But we work closely with the Ministry of Education to try to promote STEM education interests. And I'm happy to report that, for example, 5 years ago, the entry grades for students going into our university's computer science department was something in the region of BCC for the 3 A-level subjects, if you are familiar with A-level subjects. And medical school was AAA. As of last year, both medical school and the computer science faculty entry grades for students is actually AAA now. I think people respond to bigger trends. And of course, one of the bigger trends is that actually it pays to work in the big technology companies these days. And partly as a result of that, I guess there's a switch in interest. A second sub-story of long-term capabilities is that, coming to Professor Chan's point about PPP, I think before we engage in any PPP, before we engage with the private sector, in the Singapore government, we feel that we have to build the strong engineering capability before we even want to deal with the engineering company, so that you're talking at the same level, you're talking on equal terms, and when you specify things, standards, when you specify requirements in your tender, you can hold the companies to it, and they cannot run rings around you. So that's very important, and I can elaborate at length about how within the government we're trying to build a strong engineering capability. In fact, the Prime Minister has a certain instruction to us that we have to build ourselves to be like a tech company, to be like a Bay Area tech company. And partly as a result of that, we do have quite a few engineers who have worked in the Bay Area, work in Apple, work in Amazon, work in Facebook, work in Google, work in ThoughtWorks. And one of the key things that have allowed us to do that is that we pay close to commercial salaries. It's something unusual, something that is difficult to do, I know. So as the previous panels have said, different countries have different issues, different problems, different start points, and we are lucky that within the civil service, we can pay quite close to commercial salaries. That we have to build good infrastructure as a long-term capability. I think Prof. Chan has stated about broadband, but it's more than broadband. It is that we are building a whole data architecture to collect data systematically, be able to fuse it, be able to have clean data. We will never have the sort of quantity of data that big countries have, but we will have data that will be of very high quality. And not just data in stovepipes, but data that can be fused horizontally across different domains, whether it's transport, whether it's the social sector, whether it's the economic sector, whether it's the education sector. We will build the architecture to be able to fuse data horizontally, even if we don't have the quantity to challenge other countries for that. One other area in which long-term capability is incredibly important is in the area of regulation, how to have a regulatory framework that is both innovative and trusted. It's a difficult balance to strike. And when we look at the world, there are different countries trying to do different things, and some countries are more innovative, but not necessarily in an environment where the public will trust them. Other countries are at the other spectrum whereby it is very safe, but it's clearly inhibiting innovation. We are trying to strike the middle where we are trying to be innovative, trying not to inhibit the private sector from innovating, from being creative, but in a way that the regulation is not too far behind the innovation. Again, I can go into more examples if time allows, if another occasion allows. A third main point I would like to make then, so first is that it's very outcome focused, it's very user centric. Second point I will make is that we are equally focused not just in delivering current outcomes, but in building long-term capabilities, so that as the technology change, we have the engineers to latch on to whatever, many of you will be familiar with the Gartner sort of cycle. Technologies come, technologies go. We will have enough spectrum and enough pool of engineers to be able to follow each wave of technology. The third point I'd like to make is that we are also very focused on the risk of using technology. And I think this is critical because I don't know if IMD distributed out any CV of the speakers, but I was a pilot in the Air Force before. And we always have this thing about how if you are not safe, it doesn't matter how good you are, one day you will sort of come to an end. And technology is the same in the sense that if we don't focus on the sort of things that ensure that it is used safely, eventually the public's trust in how you use technology will be eroded. So two of the key things in how we go about handling the risk of technology, one is the usual cybersecurity, data security. I think many of you will be familiar with that. For example, we are undergoing a very comprehensive review of data security within the government, how to safeguard a government, and we probably be prepared to spend a few hundred more million than we originally did just some months ago. The report is going to be out next month. If you want to follow Singapore news, you will see that soon. But the other very key topic that I think can erode trust in technology is how inclusive it is. Whether the technology is used for the good of just individuals getting ahead in their careers, or whether technology is used for the whole society to bring everybody along. So that is something that's quite key. And that's why when we choose use cases, when we choose services to deliver, we look at the different segments of the society to make sure that we serve them not equally well, but some sectors actually we maybe spend even more effort. We will be, for example, looking into AI in a deep way, and two of the areas in which we intend to use AI a lot will be in health and education. Not areas in which you will see very immediate direct impact on economic growth or economic productivity, but things that will clearly and very immediately, tangibly benefit citizens. I think that's very crucial. Using, I think, some of the preposition that Bruno used, we intend to do things not just for the citizens, but we also intend to do it with them. Definitely not to them. I think if you use technology to do things to citizens, that is when trust will be gone, and you will not be able to build yourself into a smart city. So that's the third point I would make. The fourth point I will make is that this ranking of Singapore being number one and all that is nice to have, but I'm under no illusion that it's like we are doing such a great job. We are really at the beginning. Honestly, from the inside, looking at what we have done, I really feel that we haven't done that much. There's so much more to do. But one thing that I think maybe differentiates Singapore from the other cities, that maybe makes it easier for us to do well, is that actually there's no separation between us as a city and us as a country. We are a city-state. And it makes things a lot easier. The international literature doesn't make a big deal out of this, but you often read about smart cities, but most of the technologies that are implemented or built for smart cities are municipal services type of technology. But there are other technologies that actually make a big difference to a citizen's life that is very difficult to achieve at the city level. So things like digital identity, things like digital payments. It's very difficult to imagine that Zurich has a fantastic digital payment landscape while Geneva does not and Lausanne does not. Digital payments covers the whole country. A digital identity will cover the whole country. So these are the things that makes it easier for us to deliver benefits to the citizens, because we are both a city and a country. The sort of technologies I invest in, the sort of technologies I build, benefits the citizen, both as a citizen of the city and citizen of a country. And maybe in that sense, it makes it easier for us to do well in rankings. So I think that's just the truth. It's not my being modest and all that. But I need to point that out. So those are the four main points I'd like to make. Very outcome-focused, very citizen-centric, long-term capabilities, managing the risks, and the fact that we are a city-state. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So at the end of this ranking presentation, thanks a lot to all the panelists, and thank you, Arturo. Yes, of course, Bruno, if you want to add a word.
Just a quick word, because we've thanked a number of people, and there are two people in this room I think we should thank all together, because they've been critically important in what we have been doing for the last 2 years. And one is in the WCC team, that's Christos Kabolis. I don't know if Christos is in the room. So thank you, Christos. And the other one who is also with us is Sri Kumar, the economist on the side of SUTD. So thank you, Sri.
Thank you very much, Bruno, and thanks for this ranking. I think it's very important for all cities on Earth to have this kind of benchmark and to have the Singapore testimonies. Someone asked me before if we could see all these panels. Of course we can. Point number one, they are live streamed. Okay, that's too late for you now. But on the second point, they'll be on YouTube channel as soon as maybe tomorrow morning, Arturo,
Yes.
I guess. But we can see this again, and I think there's really a lot of food for thought here we can hear. And thanks a lot again for this panel and all these informations.
Thank you.
But now, as you know, in Switzerland, we're very precise with aperitif time. It's time to end this first day. I want to thank you all very much. We'll be back here tomorrow morning at 9:30 to celebrate the guy who brought us here, which is Professor Stéphane Garidi. He'll be here on stage with us to talk about competitiveness, and then the 3 last panels, and that'll be since 9:30 tomorrow morning. You can come already at 9, there'll be coffees. But now, straight away, time for aperitif, and thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.